thousands and thousands of ordinary men and women who were willing to put their bodies and in some cases their lives on the line. Civil rights movement mostly dismantled the apparatus of voting repression in the South, but turnout rates in the rest of the country continued to fall. Some people felt that to have a healthy democracy, we needed to include more people in the political system. These activists began pushing for ways that they believed would make voting easier. In 1992, a predominantly Democratic Congress with a few Republican votes passed an act that was designed to do that. The act was vetoed by President George Bush. So in this situation of divided government, Republican President George Bush was in his first term, and he had very high approval ratings. Democrats, who dominated Congress, vowed to keep submitting the bill. If Bush kept vetoing it, they felt that at the very least it could embarrass President Bush for not seeming to be in favor of getting more people to vote. Surprisingly to both Democrats and Republicans, Bush's poll numbers began slipping, and a Democrat, Bill Clinton, won the election for president in 1992. Now that there was a chance that the electoral reform might actually be signed into law, Democrats in Congress seemed to stop talking about the issue. In the previous congressional session, most Republicans had voted against the bill, and almost all Democrats had voted for it. But privately, the feelings of Democrats in Congress were more conflicted. Apparently, some Democratic politicians felt that since they had been elected under the old system, shaking up the system might result in their losing. The moral that I draw from this is that whatever Democrats or any other politicians may say in public, they may not fight for legislation protecting voting rights unless they're forced to. This case had a somewhat happy ending. Pro-voting activists did their best by demonstrations to publicize what they saw as hypocrisy by these Democratic legislators. They embarrassed Democrats in Congress enough that they did pass the legislation again, and it was signed by President Clinton. The bill allowed voters to register at virtually any government agency, social services, or giving it the name motor voter, at DMV. Since motor voter was passed, the decline in the percentage of eligible voters who are registered, that decline has slowed, but it hasn't reversed. It still was slowly going down. The Voting Rights Act, which had originally been passed in 1965, was intended to prevent states from using these end runs in order to disenfranchise black voters. The act had been reauthorized by overwhelming majorities in Congress every time it had come to a vote. But in 2013, the Supreme Court struck down a number of sections of that 1965 Voting Act. The court said that treating some states, the states mostly in the South that were covered under that original act, that treating those states differently than others based on the fact that they had discriminated in the past violated federalism. Under the Voting Rights Act, if the National Justice Department could show that a state's change in voting rules was going to disproportionately hurt or disenfranchise a particular racial group, then that would be enough to rule out that change. Now, that was no longer the case. Now, the Justice Department would need to show that that was the intention, would need to prove that the legislature intended to disenfranchise members of a particular racial group. In practical terms, as long as no one was stupid enough to say publicly that they were trying to disenfranchise African Americans or any other group, state legislatures could pretty much do what they wanted. Obama's presidential election scared some Republicans. They worried that Obama and the Democrats' popularity among younger voters, Latin Americans, and Black Americans would make it almost impossible for a Republican ever to win the presidency. A number of states with state legislatures dominated by Republicans did pass laws which restricted voting. Supporters of these laws have been unable to present any evidence substantiating the idea that there's a problem, and in particular, there's no evidence that voter impersonation occurs frequently. Although the voter ID laws have gotten the most attention, they've been accompanied by a series of changes where it's hard to see how they could reduce fraud. Many states have shortened voting hours, reduced the number of polling places. They've shortened, or in some cases even eliminated, early voting. They've eliminated the ability of voters to register on the same day, that is Election Day. They've eliminated pre-registration for 17-year-olds, something that high schools used to do. A number of states have made registration drives by community groups more difficult, more risky, or in some cases actually outright illegal. In a number of states, including Texas, a gun permit would constitute an acceptable ID, but a college ID would not. This is still going on. Recently, we learned that the state of Georgia had rejected almost 35,000 voter registration forms over the past 3 years. The huge majority of them were from non-white Georgians, although whites were about half the state's voting age population. The moral here, that I leave up to you. All right, now I'll get out of this stuffy little voting booth, go to my computer, and I look forward to seeing what you've written in the discussion section.
You don't get out and vote this year, you're really not proving. It takes every one of us to keep the country moving.